Education and training is going to be revolutionized over the next decade. And the challenge that we have is to break down the silos that we've had in medical education for the past 100 years and see if we can bring together a new world order, if you will, in medical education and training. The reason that I say that is that the last time that there was a change in education and medicine was 100 years ago. The Flexner Report back in the United States that was spawned from a rigorous scholarly investigation of the 130 uncertified hospitals that were around that were training people, pruning them down to about 23 that were actually met criterion that were set by the Flexner group and Dr. Flexner himself. And since then, what we've been doing is having a structured residency training program that has not fundamentally changed since we began that. We've had iterative improvements along the way. We've expanded upon it, but it's basically the same apprenticeship relationship that we've ever had in the past. And I think that what we have with, let me just put this on, that we've had with the education and training is brought upon the opportunities that we have from simulation. Simulation, of course, has been used for over 90 years now in other disciplines other than our discipline of medicine. So I am going to have to be sitting my examinations for recertification. That's me. This is where we are right now because the educational process, at least in the United States, is still the same, and it hasn't taken advantage of the simulation training that's going on in our various residency training programs, our nursing programs, and the other health professions. So the challenge is, how do we take a very complex task, somewhat similar to this, break it down to its constituent parts, and then be able to teach an individual how to do this? This is the way that we've been doing it, literally, for hundreds. Oops, there's an error. We never told him that he might make a mistake. And he now has a crushed toe because he never learned how to do it properly in a safe environment, i.e. a simulated environment. So the question that I think that we're facing right now is, how can we take this model of education and training and capitalize on it and make it as safe as, say, aviation, nuclear industry, military, and so forth? The revolution is now, and as I mentioned, it's been 100 years. If we don't get this right, what's going to happen over the next 100 years until technology or some other scientific invention creates an opportunity to revolutionize education again, we are going to have every institution training competitively and with redundant resources the same material. Because the way that we are training today is not integrated. If I trained here at Cork, it would be completely different than the way I would be training at Yale, and completely different perhaps when I was at Mayo or at the University of Washington now. We're all training for the same thing, but we're all different. I think that we can come to some consensus, but it's going to take an enormous amount of opportunity. The revolution is not only about technology, but for the first time that I'm aware of, and I've been in education for almost 40 years now, that we're focusing on the patient. All education has been about the nurse, the doctor, or the allied health professional, but it really now it's about the patient. How can we center what we're going to educate our health professionals with on the patient? Something that has changed recently, and we can take advantage of through simulation, is the definition of what it means to be a competent physician. In the United States, the ACGME, Accreditation Council of Graduate Medical Education, and the Board of Medical Specialties came up with what they think are the 6 important competencies for which we will be examined in the future. The interesting thing when you look at these is that, with the exception of knowledge, which we usually get from pedagogical materials, or direct patient care, whether it be seeing the patient in the room or operating upon them, the other ones have never been trained or taught before. Interpersonal and communication skills, Professionalism, practice-based learning. It's something that we were expected to pick up as we would follow our mentors around. So we now have an opportunity using simulation to address these and begin to establish training programs and educational programs that will incorporate these in a more formal way, in a way that we've never done before. The two components of this revolution in medical simulation are, one, we can do this objectively. Simulation provides the opportunity to do measurements. We have simulators, the technology, and we have a methodology now, the curriculum. A curriculum that we've had now that's more formal than the one we've had before, particularly when we do procedural and skills training. The second component of this is that we can set objective measures of performance, so we can measure whether or not you've performed properly. And by having criterion set by our experts, we can train our individual students to a criterion as opposed to setting them for a time, which is the way that our training is today. So by applying objective metrics and making this a competency-based training, we are going to revolutionize the way that we practice medicine. Why do I emphasize competency-based training? Now, you can cover your ears if you want to hear this, but, for example, I just took my test in my simulation laboratory, and I got 95%. So I go the next morning to my clinic, and I see my patient, and I said, look, I'm going to do this hernia operation on you tomorrow, and I just passed my test, and I'm going to make 5% error when I operate on you. Can you imagine your pilot saying, welcome, passengers. We're going to take off and land, and we got a 5% chance of crashing. I just proved it unequivocally by being measured. Why is it? Why do we have a time-based training? Well, it's convenient for a structured program, but it's not convenient for our patient. So the way that we're going to be education and training, particularly in our procedural skills, will be that you come to the laboratory and you train. And you train until you make 100%. It may take you 1 trial, 2 trials, 10 trials, 50 trials, but you don't see that first patient and operate on them until you've gotten 100%. This is something that I think that is allowable by simulation because we can measure your performance and we can tell whether or not you've achieved it. Up until now, the metric was, my boss thinks I did well, let's operate. That's basically the way we've done it in the past. So we've got quantitative measurements, and we've got ways to perform them. For example, we can insert the instruments in a little robotic system called the Blue Dragon, and we can actually measure. This is what's called a motion signature. It tells you exactly what your performance is. And not only do we see the patterns to this, but we also could measure the actual forces that are used, the torque, the acceleration, the pressure, and so on and so forth. So when we look at that, we can tell you how to improve yourself as well as measure it. And you can clearly see the difference between, this is tying a laparoscopic knot, and the novice is in one place and the expert is the other area. And you can tell just by looking at it that the novice is a klutz. He's all over the place. He doesn't know how to tie a knot. But our expert there, she is precise. She knows exactly where to press the tips and use very small, precise motions. And so this is the type of technology that's available that we can do that. The other thing is that if I've got a surgeon that's operating, how can I tell if she's going to make a mistake because she doesn't know what she's doing or because she doesn't have the good hand-eye coordination, psychomotor skills? One way to do it is to go through the didactic component of it, particularly if one uses computer graphics or virtual reality, in such a way that they learn exactly the steps of the procedure using a mouse. And we know exactly where they identify all of the actual structures and use the right tools and do the right steps of the procedure. And then they take a test and they pass it with 100%. Then when they get on their simulator, they use exactly the same image that they used on the computer for the didactic portion, their cognitive skills. But now they're going to go ahead and try to do that same procedure using the exact instruments they would do. So if they make an error, it's because they're a klutz. They just proved that they know what to do, how to do it, and how to identify the objects. Now they're going to do the procedure, theoretically. The mistake they make is not because they don't know what they're doing or how to do it, it's because they're a klutz. So we have the opportunity to do that because we have measurement skills. And we're also trying to look at, can we determine where judgment comes in on this? Now, this is from our Darcy lab in Materiel with eye tracking and hand motions. And what we were able to notice from this is that a novice will look at the tip of the instrument, and his eye gaze will follow that instrument until the task is completed. An expert, on the other hand, who has got automation of their hand-eye coordination skills, will follow the task until he knows what is going to be done, and then immediately the eye gaze goes to the next part of the operation. What they have done is they freed up their attention center from their psychomotor skills and allows them to move them into their cognitive component of it. So we've got those opportunities. We have mandates for the very first time. The American Residency Review Committee has mandated if you have a surgical training program, you must have access to a simulation center. Otherwise, you're on probation. So we've got the scurry back in the United States of everybody trying to get simulation centers up. In 2009, the American Board of Surgery said that if you do not pass the skills test called the Fundamentals of Laparoscopic Surgery, when you send in your application, it is incomplete and you may not set your exam. We don't care how long you've been in training. If you haven't passed your psychomotor skills, you will not become a surgeon and you will not get your certificate. So they're getting pretty serious back in the States on this. If we're going to develop a curriculum, who should be involved in it? Well, actually, it turns out that there are multiple players in this. The department chair or the program director has to set up the program, what it is that we're going to be training. The faculty have to give input in order to tell whether or not, as a teacher, you can actually be able to execute the training program. We need to involve the learner to understand whether or not they're even going to be able to execute or to be able to learn the program. And what we've learned recently is that we have to involve, if we're going to develop a curriculum, the certification authorities. They set up the measurements. And if we don't have a training program that meets the measurements that they're willing to certify, then we have wasted our entire time and money on trying to develop that curriculum. So it's not about the simulator, it's about the curriculum. And we can do it either for initial training or we could use it for retraining, maintenance of certification, administrative leave, pregnancy, sabbaticals, illnesses, and so on and so forth. We discovered from sending over our combat surgeons over to Iraq and Afghanistan that when it comes back, it takes them between 3 to 6 months for them to get back the skills that they had lost when they went over. Our OBGYN, our pediatric surgeons, and so on and so forth. They're busy doing amputations and burr holes, and then they have to go back and do a cardiac cath on a little neonate. This is not going to work. You have to retrain them when they get back to the regular environment. So maintenance of certification and retraining is a different set of skills that you need to retrain them on. A standardized curriculum, what we were able to discover is that we have to teach our students how to make mistakes because it's not a priori. I was standing behind an individual one time while they were trying to do a laparoscopic knot, and they kept making the same mistake. And so I tapped them on the shoulder, and I said, you know, you've made that mistake 3 times in a row. And they turned around very angry and said, what mistake? You never told me that was wrong. You were so busy telling me what was right, I wasn't able to recognize something that was wrong. So we have to include, if you will, errors on there. And this is the beauty of simulation. We learned very interestingly that if you sneak the mannequin into the intensive care or some other place and call a code, everybody runs and they say, oh my God, why? This is a mannequin. And you know what the answer is? If that mannequin dies, you're off the team. You don't get to do a code anymore. You have to pass that. Of course, the sweat comes out. And one of the things that we discovered very interestingly is systems error. For example, the team leader would say, give me epinephrine. He takes it, draws it out, shoots it into the patient, and the patient dies instantly. And then he happens to take a look at it and says, oh my God, that was 1 in 1,000 instead of 1 in 10,000. I just killed that patient. It's not my fault. Whose fault is it? Why didn't they have the right dose, or why didn't he check the dose before he gave it? So these are the ways that by putting them in situ, we can discover systems errors that are not apparent when you try to do the same thing in the actual skills laboratory. And how about choreography? we teach our people, and we're doing team training. But for example, how many of you have gone to a ballet, and you've noticed at the ballet that the ballerina jumps, and there's a person there to catch them? Why? Because they've rehearsed this repeatedly. There's cues that they use and so forth. Do not go to the operating room and watch what happens. There is no coordination between them, and the doctor does what he wants to do, and then he says, scalpel, and he holds out his hand and waits. If a team has worked together for a long time, they kind of intuitively get some choreography. We need to look at this as a way to incorporate that into our team training as well. Surgical rehearsal, it's here today. Why is it that when I go in, I had x-rays that I look at and lab tests, but I may not know exactly what's going on, and I have to be impromptu every time. Could you imagine if every time that somebody was, a pilot was going to land at a new airport, that they'd never practiced it before? You cannot land at an airport without flying in the simulator exactly the aircraft and on exactly the airport under multiple conditions before you do that. And they do this every 6 months for every airport that they're going to fly into. So the point is, we can do that. We have total body scanning, we have angiograms, and we are doing it now for the carotid stenting. So patient-specific surgical rehearsal. Make the mistakes on the patient before you operate on them, not on the patient. So that when you make the mistakes on the patient, hopefully when you operate, you don't make the same mistake on the actual patient themselves. And preoperative warm-up. Does any of our surgeons in here warm up before they operate? Have you ever gone to, say, a sports event, a tennis match? They don't sit down on the end drinking a Coke and then jump up and serve. What do? They're practicing their serves before they go out. On the basketball court, they're dribbling and shooting hoops. Your surgeon dashes in, quickly signs the last document, scrubs his hands, and cuts. There's no warm-up. And we've demonstrated that we can decrease errors and improve efficiency by warming up. And so we're looking at how can we leverage off of the new technologies for social networking and so forth. Virtual worlds, and you saw Milo. That would be one generation beyond, for example, Second Life and so forth. So this is what we're proposing. That simulation gives us an opportunity to recraft the entire educational experience. Not just to do something a little bit better or practice an operation, but rather to revolutionize the entire way that we're going to do education and training. Thank you very much.